So why? Can you talk a little bit about this, as I've heard or read in your publications, and I'm sure others as well, this anabolic resistance decline? Like what is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I don't think that you can discount inactivity with aging. You know, everything as it gets older, you know, from earthworms all the way up to, you know, humans, we do less as we age. There's no question about that. We have done some studies where we've used step reduction, like abrupt step reduction, as a model of sort of abrupt sedentarism, where we can make older people much more anabolically resistant as a result of that. So clearly activity is a driver of it. At the same time, I think there's probably aspects to do with insulin resistance, and it doesn't need to be overt insulin resistance to the degree that you have type 2 diabetes, but maybe you have what we call vascular insulin resistance. And what this means is that when you turn on insulin, you usually open up blood vessels to allow flow to happen. And what we think happens with aging is that response becomes just a little bit less sensitive. You're not insulin resistant from the perspective of blood sugar, but from a protein perspective, we think that opening up local capillaries and allowing good blood flow in older people just isn't quite as sensitive. So again, people say, wow, you know, what can I do? And the number one answer is to be as physically active as you can. And that maintains that vascular level sensitivity as you get older. Aging is going to get you at some point, there's no question. But clearly, as you've said, the cornerstone is to maintain your physical activity levels, be as active as possible. Aerobic exercise, absolutely. Resistance exercise, it's got to be there.
And what about in terms of how many times a week resistance exercise? Because you hear about you mentioned the, you know, there's the 10,000 steps. People talk about the 10,000 steps, right? So I mean, is there something people can think about? And does it age dependent? Does that change as well, right?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, the origins of 10,000 steps is also probably, you know, people go, where does that come from? And you're like, that's a good question. I mean, it's a great round number. I think that's, you know, when you go back to the history of those little pedometers, it was just, you know, that's a good number. And it's probably true, you know, the closer you get to around 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, you start to see health benefits. So I'm not going to dismiss that. Resistance training, it's a little bit more difficult. Most of the guidelines you look around the world, there's a recommendation for 2 times a week of strengthening activities. My own feeling is that it should be more than recommended. It should be a de rigueur part of the guidelines, like 150 minutes. And I do think 2 days a week is that's the buy-in level. I mean, if somebody's doing nothing and they do 1, big change. They do 2, big change. I think 3, bigger change. 4, I'm like, I don't know, you're probably starting to see the plateau. 5, I'm like, yes, if it's your thing. 6, you go. 7, you're mad, but go for it. But it's a dose response, like a lot of things, right? 150 minutes is kind of where we tap out a lot of the benefits, and then you go from there to say double in 300 minutes, and you can squeeze a little bit more out of the cloth, but you've kind of got a lot of the benefits with the first 150.
Let's say you're doing, so that's 150 minutes of strength.
That's aerobic exercise. Sorry, yeah.
So then when you're talking about, let's say you were doing the 2 days a week of resistance training, what's the duration for each of those? Is it?
Here's where we climb inside the really kind of nuanced things, and it's sort of like, do we do free weights, we do machines, we do sets, we do reps, and everything. And this is actually, I think, one of the barriers for a lot of people is that you know, most people, I say 10,000 steps, they're like, oh, walking, I can do that. And then you say weightlifting, they're like, oh, I hate going to the gym. And you're like, okay, well, have you ever done a push-up? And they're like, yeah, but I hate push-ups. And most people hate push-ups because they were used as a form of punishment when you were a kid. At least that's my feeling. But you know, you don't need a gym to do resistance workouts. You can do body weight workouts just about anywhere. You can do like an air squat up and down, and you don't need a weight. But you know, sets, reps, you know, my main point is getting to do that at least twice a week for, let's say, 30 to 45 minutes duration. There's a lot of benefit associated with that. I think 3 times, you can get a little bit more, but it's about making clear that the biggest reduction in risk, bar none, is always going from nothing to doing something. And not that we should aim at the, the smallest or the lowest bar or anything else like that, but as we mentioned, I was, saying before we got on camera, these nudges of people that are really sedentary at a population level, if we got everybody to walk for even 10 minutes a day, and then maybe they did, a push-up, even if they can't do a floor push-up, let's say a wall push-up, and maybe went how to walk outside, how good they would feel, mental health, physical health, and everything. And the population effects would be pretty substantial. So I'm good if if you're like me and you like to go to the gym and you like to lift some weights. I don't lift heavy weights anymore. I think that's sort of a diabolical pursuit, but if that's your thing, go for it. But I think it's more about getting to the gym, performing a workout with pretty high levels of effort, which is I stopped prescribing percentages of your maximal lift. I just say lift until you're pretty fatigued at the end, and you should do pretty well.
And when you're lifting or you're doing any type of resistance and or strength training, you are also causing muscle protein breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But the mechanical force on the muscles are increasing protein synthesis, or what are they doing?
No, that's great. Great explanation. Yeah, I mean, I think, our wall analogy again is to say that actually exercise, physical exercise, and particularly some forms, but weightlifting is a really potent one, turns up the rate at which we're pulling bricks out of the wall. You're creating damage. You're creating a stress on the muscle. Successful adaptation to stress is that you're able to repair that damage and replace those damaged proteins, and that's the synthesis side of things. And then, clearly what we're aiming for is, so we have damage and then we have synthesis, but now you've gone up a little bit, and then we have damage, synthesis, and over time, it's sort of down, up, down, up, down, up, but the trend is that you're getting better and better. The same with aerobic exercise. I mean, it's, I'd say to people, like, the exercise is great, but it's in recovery that's where all the good stuff happens, because we, as a result, repair any damage, recover from the stress, and hopefully recover fully so that we're at a better starting point. Again, sometimes it's small changes, but over time, people say, when I first started, I was so tired. And I'm like, yeah, it's hard work when you first get started. Get past month 1, month 2, month 3, and then now you're 6 months later, you're like, I'm so much stronger, I'm so, et cetera, et cetera. It takes time, and the stress is stress. You have to overcome it, but the benefits are massive.
Does the recovery, is there certain, like if you're doing the strength training, let's say you do 30 minutes one day, like should you take, taking the next day off matter, or can you like do it 2 days in a row and then recover? Is that just?
Again, these are the sorts of things I think, when you become more advanced, so now I'm like, okay, I've got 3 days in the gym a week, I've got that down, no problem. And it becomes, what more can I do to sort of maximize what I'm getting out of the workout that I'm doing? Most people split, say, a resistance workout. They might pair exercises, or the most rudimentary one is sort of say, there are pushing exercises, so that above your head. There are pulling exercises, or a bicep curl, and then there are leg exercises. So pushing, pulling, legs, and you're working different muscle groups, and that's 3 days a week. It gives you, the muscle has lots of time to recover. Some people do it really differently. The bodybuilding culture gets into, individual body parts. So today is a bicep day, the next day is a tricep day. Monday is usually always chest day. You're under the bar doing a bench press. You work on your legs, you work on your lower legs, you work on your upper legs. All of those are things that, ways of splitting it up. I think, my advice to most people is to say you can probably break most exercises, resistance exercises, down into some pretty basic ones. There is a push from your back, that's a bench press. There's a shoulder press above your head. I'm not a big fan of isolation exercises, but squatting or a leg press, if you don't want to squat, is really, those are the 3 sort of If you walked away and remember nothing, those are great exercises. You don't need to do too much more, to be honest with you, but you branch out from there. I do think some people can handle a lot more. I know from my own experience when I was younger, I could do a heck of a lot more, and the recovery came a lot easier. Now, not so much, and the goals are different. My goal now is, it has a 20-year horizon, 30-year horizon. So that's something I'm like, how long does it take you to recover? I'm like, well, I don't know. I took a day off yesterday. I was okay.
Does protein help with recovery? I mean, how much of a role does, for example, we talked about leucine, how much does essential amino acids like that activate IGF-1? Does IGF-1 play a role in muscle repair?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think, as I said, it's in recovery where all the good stuff happens. Like the workout is putting the stress on the muscle and the bones, the joints, etc. And then the recovery part, the stress is removed, and it's like, okay, now it's repair time, recovery time. 3 hours, rehydrate, refuel, repair. So you got to get fluid back in if you've lost that. It's a primary one. You got to get fuel back in, particularly if, the next day you're going to do another workout. The repair part, that's where the protein comes in. There's a lot of thoughts that the regenerative process also involves, hormones going up and everything else. And I think for a large part, particularly when you're an adult, that's a non-issue. Most of the restorative process and the recovery process is driven almost exclusively by macronutrients. And so IGF-1, I'm like, needs to be there, but it's not a stimulatory or an inhibitory hormone for repair or recovery.